All right, let's head over to our Zoom line. Warren Martin on the line with us. Kansas Strong. How you doing today, sir?
Doing great. How about yourself, Jason?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for coming back for episode
Yeah.
two of Landman, starring Billy Bob Thornton, Demi Moore, Jon Hamm as the top billed actors and actresses for the program. Today we're going to talk about episode two, Dreamers and Losers. It was titled, and that, of course, came out of a quote from Billy Bob Thornton. Tommy Norris, I believe, is his name in the film. I've got my notes down, Mr. Warren Martin. Hopefully you do too. But the show starts off, and it's in a shared house, and I got a big chuckle to myself, and I thought, if anything is going to sum up kind of the comedic drama, let's move some family storylines together in a unique way. Boy, I tell you what, the shared house and the oil patch, I thought that was a very cultural way to start off episode two, Warren Martin. What say you?
Yeah, and it's not unusual for the oil patch in any way, shape, or form to have that community housing that's taking place. You see that in episode three. It comes back with them all living in barracks and living together on barracks on a lease. But especially when you're talking about the oil industry, which is predominantly men and predominantly single men who tend to congregate together. And amongst all these single men, you always have family men that are, living in Kansas but traveling to North Dakota, living in Kansas but traveling to the Permian Basin to work in a different oil field. And when they do that, they tend to gather together in community housing to save on costs. And especially when you have a boom, like in Midland, where the movie takes place, you have a boom in Midland, housing rates can go up 1,000%. And so community housing is definitely a part of the oil patch. It's nothing unique to this film, but it does set up an interesting dynamic for some interesting lines.
The second thing I wrote down for my notes of episode two of Landmen, Dreamers, and Losers was the blowout. I
Mhm.
wrote down blowout. That really seemed to be the theme of episode two, was more of an educational process of what a blowout is, how some of the different people respond to a blowout, kind of what happens, and some of the severity behind it as well. What was your takeaway from the whole blowout theme that was permeating through episode two?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to kind of what we talked about in episode one. Generally, you don't have people who are working on the rig that then are also the pumpers that are pumping the units throughout the lease. Those are usually two different jobs that are done different ways. I see a little bit of discrepancy between what actually happens in the field and what's happening on the TV show as a whole, from the standpoint of the oil and gas industry is a highly technical industry, meaning that safety is key. A blowout is extremely rare, and every blowout makes national news because it is that rare when it does take place. And safety is a major concern. And so that's why our industry has become extremely highly technical based on the job that you have and that you're working with. And when I say that, and I say there's discrepancies, I mean, one of the things that all you have to do to look at is you see when Norris goes back, Tommy Norris goes back to the well side after it's blown out. He asks everybody, "Did you close the valve? Did you close the valve?" This is the guy that's in the know. And then he grabs a pipe wrench, puts on his fire jacket, which I don't know any landmen that carry a fireman's helmet and a fireman's jacket in their car, but he puts on the fireman's jacket, he puts on the fireman's helmet, he walks out to the Christmas tree and takes his pipe wrench and his hammer and bangs off his finger trying to close the valve. And if you think that this is a historically accurate film, all you got to do is look at how he uses the wrench, because he uses the pipe wrench backwards. If you hit a pipe wrench the way that he hits a pipe wrench, it'll never move a bolt to save your life, because the way he was hitting it was backwards, which opens the jaws and loosens it on the nut rather than hitting it the other way, which closes the jaws and tightens it on the nut to get the valve closed. So the pipe wrench wasn't even used in the right way. So there's a lot of discrepancy that does take place in the technical aspects of it, but it points to the fact that our industry is a highly technical industry where the people who are doing the job know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They know how they're doing it. They are very specialized in what they're doing. They go through regular safety trainings on a regular basis about how to address all of these issues, what to look for. Do accidents still happen? Yes, they still happen. And they usually happen when someone does not follow the safety protocols, like using a wrench the wrong way. And so I think, when I watched the blowout and I saw the wrench on there backwards, I was like, okay, you would think that someone that was in the production would be able to say, that's not how you use a pipe wrench.
Continuity must not have made the budget during the last filming
Yeah.
of that for sure.
There were several continuity issues in that scene. Another one is he bangs the end of his finger off. His son is taken away in an ambulance going away. He's sitting there talking with the sheriff about whether he's going to go to the hospital or not. And the sheriff says, "Do you want me to call the ambulance back?" And he says, No, don't call the ambulance back. And then several scenes show him talking to the sheriff, and there's an ambulance right behind him the entire time that they're talking. So it's there are some continuity issues that are taking place here, but the reality is a blowout is an extremely detrimental event that happens on an oil lease. It's very rare. It hardly ever happens. When it does happen, it's a major deal. And when it does happen, it's not just OSHA you're concerned with. You got OSHA, you got the EPA, you got whatever state agencies in charge. In Texas, that's probably the Railroad Commission. Here in Kansas, it would be the Kansas Corporation Commission. And you've got all of these forces that are overseeing what's going on in that oil field that now you have to answer to. And no one wants to do that. And that's why we make safety such a high priority. That's why, and not to mention the lives of the people that are involved in there, but we make safety and we make the specialization of jobs so important to ensure that we don't have events like that happen in the oil field.
For every time there's a opportunity for a lesson in safety, it seems like they follow it up with a time is money moment. And the moment that we're talking about now is when he's at the hospital and he cuts off his own finger to speed up the process rather than go through a bunch of surgical hand surgeons and a lot of the what did you make of that? I mean, because obviously we just came out of some continuity issues with using a pipe backward or using a wrench backwards and some editing issues. I mean, you really do have to suspend your belief quite a bit in this dramatic series, Landman, and that's okay. I'm actually quite enjoying this series, to be honest with you. But when he cut off his own finger basically to speed up the sewing process, that seemed like one of the more real moments actually in the oil field to me. What did you make of that?
Potentially, if he was still out on the rig, I could see that happening.
Yes.
You're talking about a hospital system in today's world where when you go into the ER and you get released, you can't even walk out to your car. You have to roll out in a wheelchair. And if you think that that a doctor is going to sit there and let you cut off a finger in front of you without committing you to the psych ward for evaluation, then you're insane. That if it was out on the rig and it was on the back of the truck and he did it, that's one thing. But being there, even there, it's a little far fetched. But I could see that in certain situations with the adrenaline going and stuff like that. But the reality is when you go into that situation and you're in a situation where you get injured in the industry, we take that extremely important. And I don't know of an oil and gas company that wouldn't immediately begin to intervene and make sure that that person was taken care of, that they were doctored appropriately, that the follow-up was done appropriately, that injury was fully taken care of before they were allowed back on an oil site. Because that's a huge part. Putting someone back out on a site. We just talked about the blowout and how important it is that we follow safety protocols to put someone back out on a site that doesn't have full function of their own body. That's detrimental to everybody around them. And so, I find that one while I'll be the first one to tell you that I've been in places where I've got injuries and I've taken electrical tape and wrapped it around the cut so that I could keep working. And then a lot of that kind of stuff happens in the oil industry. There are limits to how far that goes. And I think that this kind of pushes the envelope on those limits.
Going from the cutting off your own finger to speed up the process of getting stitched to having a heart-to-heart father-son talk about your son not working in the industry you're working in. There really is a lot of complex dynamics, but on the same token, some simplistic things. Son wants to follow in dad's footsteps. Daughter wants to, and we'll get into this in the next episode, daughter wants to move in with dad. So you're starting to see a lot of the real family dynamics. And that's one of the interesting parts of this Landman series that I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting kind of this much in your face family dynamics. It's usually more on the backdrop as we try to sensationalize the oil and gas industry, which they've done a very sensational job of up till now. And we'll get into some of the cartel talk in the next episode as well. But I actually am enjoying the attempt trying to humanize the industry through the family dynamics, whether it be through his son or the daughter. But in this example, here he's having a heart-to-heart with his son. And, in Billy Bob's very deadpan, I have no emotional way of saying it, he did a pretty good job of trying to convince his son, listen, don't go into this industry. It's not good for the parents. I have to go tell some parents right now that their son and loved ones are dead. And that was kind of a powerful moment, I thought. But at the same time, they did a very good job of kind of speeding through it because, hey, I just cut my finger off. I got to go do this next. And then I got to go do this next. Time is money. We got to move things along. What did you make about that? Trying to integrate in some of the serious family dynamics in with all this other oil field drama that's going on.
I think that's a very important part of the oil industry. When you look at the oil industry as a whole, you see a lot of family units that are involved in it, especially like his character, Tommy Norris, that's working for an independent oil and gas company. In independents, you have a high rate of family interactivity that's taking place. We'll get into that in the next episode a little bit with the Latino community and the family dynamics that are taking place in the Latino community there. But family is very important. And when you look at the oil and gas industry among the independents, of course, Kansas has one of the highest conglomerations of independent oil and gas producers of any region in the world. And there are a lot of family businesses that are here. You got oil businesses that are going to third and fourth generations. And honestly, I don't know very many producers that are out there that are wanting their sons and daughters to follow them into the oil patch, because it is a high risk, high reward industry, which means it's also a high risk, very low dismal reward. And in fact, when they have that moment, it's because his son accuses him of quitting. So he pulls off the road and drives off the road, slams on his brakes, and he basically says, I didn't quit. I got tapped out. I ran out of money and I had to go get a job. And that's that high risk, high reward. And how do you move forward in that? I think one of the big important points that was in that was what he says to his son, and more importantly, what his son says back to him. Because he is talking like a lot of the oil producers I know of who have gone through the ups and downs, have gone through the trauma and drama. And they're like, man, go find a job that is more secure. Go find a job that has less risk. I want you to be happy. I want you to be safe. But his son responds back and says, look, if I'm going to run an oil company when I get old, I need to know every aspect of it. I need to know it from the stake to flow, every single aspect that happens through the life of a well if I'm going to run an oil company. And I think that really points to something that's missing in the oil industry right now, or something that is slowly dying out, in the fact that we as an industry are going through what's known as the great shift change. And the great shift change means we have a lot of people in our industry that are approaching 60 years of age and older. And we have quite a few people in our industry that are 35 years of age or younger. Between 35 and 60, we have very few people in our industry because that was the period where environmentalists had really got on the horn. People decided not to go into our industry, to stay away from our industry. A lot of family dynamics were lost as far as family following family into the industry. And so you have this gap, this knowledge gap that has taken place. And a lot of people that are coming into the industry now are not coming into it from the perspective of Tommy's son. They're coming into it from the perspective of, I want to get rich. I want to be a part of something that I'm going to get rich and I'm going to jump in and I'm going to be a landman. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make it happen. And you have very few people that are coming into the industry wanting to know it from the ground up. The reason that's important is because when you go talk to independent oil and gas producers, the vast majority of them will begin giving you stories about how they started out driving a truck and then got into buying their own truck and then buying a well and then slowly progressed to where they built their own company. Story after story after story about these independent oil and gas producers who started at the ground level, working on a rig or working on a truck or working on a service crew, and they worked themselves up from those lowest positions to where they eventually owned an oil company. That's becoming a more and more rare story in our industry, and I think we're worse for it, because you're having more and more people that are in leadership positions that don't have what his son wanted, which is an understanding of the entire industry as a whole. And I think that really highlighted that point, and that point is being lost because, one, we're losing the family dynamics in the oil and gas industry, and two, because of our cultural shift and a lot of young people not wanting to go into the industry. The ones that do come in have very little knowledge about the industry when they come into it.
We'll have to talk about the great crew shift, or the what shift did you call it? The
great crew shift, yeah.
Yeah, the great, is that what you called it, or did you call it something else?
You just threw me off, and I don't remember what I called
Okay,
it. Shift change.
shift change.
There you go.
Shift change. That's what it was. Yeah, we at the Crude Life, we wrote a story about 8 years ago on this great crew shift that was happening with the amount of retirees and some of the new coming in. And one of the avenues I'd like to explore, and we'll get to it in just a second here, with the lawyer, with the introduction of the lawyer. In my notes, I wrote down woke lawyer, WOKE. And I want to ask you about that, because that seems to be a little bit generational too. So as we have this crew shift happening, there's this generational wokeness coming in as well. And I thought this Landman did a really good job of talking about or showing the different cultural dynamics when it comes to this baby boomer generation, or I'm not sure what kind of generation, if it's Gen X, baby boomer, whatever it might be, versus the woke or whatever it is. But just rounding off some of these working dynamics, the father and son and independence and corporate and some of the other things. I thought it was interesting too. Jon Hamm plays the independent oil president or owner of the independent oil company. And here he is at his daughter's track meet trying to deal with crisis management. He's got his wife, Demi Moore, yelling to come down and watch. I thought that was really something else, because you're at the top, and you're still juggling work and family and drama and oil and cash and the 2-minute race where I got to drop everything, because that's the whole reason I'm in this, is so that I can go to my daughter's 2-minute track meet race, and then I'll get back to this cartel plane crash business that happened. I thought that was really interesting, that here's the main guy, Jon Hamm, who's supposedly the richest guy in the program, and he's still dealing with the juggling of work, family, all the other importance that come into this. But what I saw a man that chose a profession so that he could drop everything to go stand next to his wife and watch a 2-minute track race, because that's what was important to that family. And then they all went off and did their own thing afterwards, and whatever the case might be. But what did you make of that? Jon Hamm, the guy that was the billionaire, he was juggling just as much as Tommy Norris and everybody else.
Yeah, and I think that was really that actually was a very realistic moment that takes place, and I don't think it's really industry specific. It's certainly a part of our industry, but being in PR, I've been in leadership in the past, I've been in nonprofits. I think that's part of every industry, and it has nothing really to do with the industry as it does with people who want to succeed in life. And we live in a world where everybody does everything they possibly can to run from problems. Most people want to make money so that they have fewer problems. Most people want a better job so they have fewer problems. Most people want a better family so they have fewer problems. And we do everything in the world we can to avoid problems. And the reality is, and one of the things that I go around and teach on leadership when I go to different corporations and talk to them about leadership development, think outside box, problem solving, those types of things, is I talk to them about how problems are really the goal that you're looking for. If you want more money, you're going to have more problems. You want a better family, you're going to have more problems. You want a better job, you're going to have more problems. And that's a good thing. We go to send our kids to school every single day. And as a parent, I send my kids to school. I fully expect that there's going to be a teacher sitting right there in front of them that intentionally puts problems in front of them every single day. Why? Because I know that in learning how to solve those problems, they become better human beings, they become better people. Isn't it amazing that when we get out of school, somehow we think that changes? And I think it really pointed the light on the fact that when you look at successful people, when you look at highly successful people, you're not looking at people who are sitting around the pool all day and just answering the phone and making yes or no decisions. You're seeing people who are actively involved in the decisions of their company. They're actively involved in the direction of their company, and that are constantly facing problems every single day that they have to overcome to continue to succeed and to continue moving forward. And that it really becomes a challenge for a lot of people in balancing their personal versus work-life mix going forward. And that's the challenge that we should all be looking for, is because that's where success is found. Success is found in being a problem solver. And I thought that scene right there really highlighted how you look at successful people, you're going to see people that are solving problems all day long, no matter what's going on. They're constantly looking for problems to solve.
Halfway through the episode, a lawyer joins the program to reconstruct and get some due diligence done on what I thought was the blowout, but apparently it turned out to be this airplane incident that happened with the cartel. One of the more interesting storylines so far that I've seen in this is kind of that woke culture versus the unwoke culture, or this new dynamic versus the old dynamic. It's about as subtle as a slap in the face. I'm really enjoying it that they're kind of putting it out there into some public discourse, because what I've seen is how it's about who can frame the narrative. It almost seems like this younger generation, or this woke generation, continues to try to reframe the narrative no matter what comes out of Tommy Norris or Billy Bob's mouth. And so that's one of the more interesting storylines that I've seen so far in this, is this woke versus unwoke, just ramming of the heads, where it's the young lawyer versus the old landman. What did you follow that at all? Did you pick up on that kind of hammering of the heads that's going on?
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the word frame, because that was exactly what I had written down in my notes as is the word frame, but I had it from a different perspective. I really don't think that the show is moving forward trying to frame either side of it. I think what the show is really trying to do is it's trying to break both frames, the frames on both sides of it, the frame of the old perspective and how we talk about our industry, and the frame of the woke generation and how they talk about our industry, to break both of those frames, to try and bring it to a point where we can have a conversation about what actually happens in the oil industry. I appreciate that. I think it succeeds at some points. I think it fails at other points. In the next episode, I think we'll talk about one way that a lot of people think it succeeds, but the way that I think the script actually showed that it failed. And so I think there's an interesting dynamic that's taking place here, where we all come to a show and we come with it with our prejudices, and when we bring those prejudices into the show, a lot of times we hear what we want to hear, and not really pay, and we don't really pay attention to the entirety of the script, just those parts of it that we like. And so I think the lawyer dynamic is going to be an interesting dynamic moving forward. And can Taylor Sheridan, through this script, effectively break the frames that the woke generation have and that the oil and gas industry have on how we see the industry, and really come to a point where we can have a conversation about what the industry really is?
Another subtle dig or point or frame, if you will, because I like that. I like the way that you framed your definition of frame there. Was I thought it was interesting, the Oil and Gas Association dinner. Did you did you pick up on that in episode 2? That little 3-minute clip they had of the lobster thermidor steak dinner that they were eating, and everybody was dressed nice. I did like the messages that they put in there, because that seemed very much like an oil and gas kind of pro petroleum dinner, if you will. The part that I laughed out loud at was Demi Moore when she said, "You call this a date? How is this a date?" Because all I could think of is that actually most people do count this as a date, because you're eating steak dinner and lobster thermidor and you're dressed up nice, and these events are borderline black tie affair. And here's Demi Moore. You call this a date? I thought that was really funny, because that seemed like an old veteran who's been to these industry dinners a lot and is just kind of like, all right, okay, all right. I'm gonna go hang out at the country club and drink margaritas like Billy Bob's uh, ex-wife, which we'll get to that in the next episode as well. But what was your takeaway? You're a regular at these oil and gas dinners. You speak at these you were the guy on stage at these oil and gas dinners, and I thought it was a pretty real description of what those things look like.
Oh, it very much was. And I'm the guy on stage that you hear in the background that's going on the litany of the positives of the oil and gas industry in the background that everybody ignores. That's me. Uh, but I've been to a ton of them. Last year, I think I did 217 face-to-face presentations last year alone. And one thing I'll tell you is my wife rarely goes with me to any of those events. Rarely goes with me, even though they are exactly what you're talking about: steaks, lobster. They are, black tie events, they're dress up events. I mean, they are galas and all that fun stuff. My wife won't go with me unless she absolutely has to, because she knows when I go to those events, I am working. And I think that's what Demi Moore and her character, when she was at that event, she's like, "You call this a date because you're working. You're here working. You're here making deals. You're here making networking and those type of things. You're here working, and I'm not going to let you call this a date. I don't care what you put in front of me, because this isn't about me. This is about your job." And I think that it's easy for us all to fall into that trap where we think we're giving our loved ones something really beneficial, but really we're there for ourselves and for our company and moving it forward. And so I thought that was very realistic.
And I thought that was a great industry gut check too. Like, hey, listen, we're going to call this thing right down the middle, how we see it, and that's a little shot at the industry, but at the same time, it's a little promotion about the industry at the same time as well. But like I said, I laughed out loud at that, and you very articulately summed up the reason why I laughed out loud, and you can thank your wife for that as well. In kind of closing for this episode, the last thing I wrote down was Jon Hamm versus Billy Bob Thornton. So you have the owner of the oil company, and his name escapes me. Do you remember his name in the show? Jon Hamm.
No, you caught me on one there.
Sorry about that. Paramount Plus, I apologize. But Tommy Norris, otherwise known as Billy Bob Thornton, there's kind of a conversation the two have, and they raise their voices at one another because they're in crisis mode. They're troubleshooting. Billy Bob Thornton, he's playing the fixer role. Jon Hamm is playing the I got to pay for everything and I got to make the hard decisions role. And then at the end they break, And Jon Hamm says, don't you ever forget who's your boss. So he kind of lays it out there that, listen, we might have been able to talk to each other, but don't raise your voice at me like that again. Don't you forget who signs the checks. I thought that was interesting because here, that from a storyline and a producer and an executive standpoint, that's almost reminding the audience who the villain is, still who the villain is there. And I thought that was kind of a very critical part of the show, especially going into a program where the richer you are is the goal of the series, right? That's kind of the goal right now. The kid wants to be rich, and it's all about the glitz and the glamour. So here's the richest guy in the show, Jon Hamm, but let's not forget he's the villain in this at the end of the day. That's to me how I took that. How did you take that interaction between the two?
Yeah, I got two things on that. One, first of all, is I think that there's a real setup that has taken place here that shows the difference between corporate think and what actually happens in the oil and gas industry, where the boss's character is caught in a situation where his lawyers and everyone around him is telling him to take Tommy Norris out, to fire him, blame everything on him, and get rid of this problem. And he's stuck in a position where he says at one point, every oil company needs a person like Tommy on your team. And there's a strong tie of loyalty that has taken place there. And I think that's a dynamic that takes place in the oil and gas industry much more to an extent than it takes place in the corporate world, because the oil and gas industry is a high risk, high reward industry, because it is an extremely dangerous industry in extremely dangerous working conditions. Those people who successfully navigate it, they earn that level of loyalty that is there. And I think that's a constant battle between when are you being loyal and when are you not being proactive for the betterment of the industry, for the betterment of your company, and for the betterment of everybody involved. And I think that's a constant thing that oil and gas producers really struggle with when it comes to dealing with HR, that corporations don't have as much of that struggle in the general corporate world of America. I think the second part of that, and when it comes to that argument between the two of them, is what he actually says to his daughter at the dinner table. And when he's talking with his daughter, when Tommy's talking with his daughter at the dinner table, he said there's only two kinds of people that come here: dreamers and losers. And then he goes in and talks about how in America we have a strong history of dreamers and people traveling west and where they were going to go off to make their wealth or die. But they had a dream and they would chase that dream at all costs. And here in the oil field, you have dreamers and you have losers. And this is the last place that dreamers come to try and make something big of their life. And he asked her, which one are you? And she says, I want to be a dreamer. And then he looks right at her and he says, well, everyone fails the first time that they dream. So you're going to be a loser. What are you going to do then? In other words, you put everybody in the oil field in the same category. We're all losers trying to figure out how to win, trying to figure out how to move forward. And it was really put against the fact that in the oil industry, you have two different types of people that are going into it. You got those people who are going into it like his son, that's their lifelong goal. That's what all they wanted to do was to go into the oil industry. They wanted to create something. They wanted to run their own company, create their own oil company. And then you got another segment of the population that works in the oil industry that comes from, they've been in prison. They were convicts. They've had hard times and struggles. They're broke. They're down on their luck. They have nowhere else to go. In both cases, you got dreamers and losers that are trying to go into into an industry that gives them massive opportunity, but it has high risk. But it has massive opportunity because it shows that everybody in America, their American spirit, if you really get down to it, the American spirit wants to succeed at doing something that matters. And the oil industry is one of those avenues that people are finding that gives them that opportunity when no one else will give them that opportunity, or give them a greater opportunity than they could find anywhere else. And so when he's talking with his boss on the phone and they're yelling at each other, you have to remember, he just told his son that I didn't quit, I went broke. And so he's still a dreamer. He still has the dream that he's always had. So he doesn't see himself as a peon in the company. He sees himself as someone who has the capability of running their own oil company, talking to someone who is running their own oil company. He sees himself on that same level, and his boss reminds him, "Yeah, but I still sign the paychecks." And so I think that whole dynamic was working in there, and I think it's great because you see that a lot in the oil industry as people come in and they work their way up through the company and eventually get to the point where they go off on their own and start their own company, start their own production. There's a lot of that conflict that takes place.
Warren Martin is the guest. Kansas Strong, Oil and Gas Resource Association. We're talking about Dreamers and Losers, episode 2 of Landman, exclusively streaming on Paramount Plus. Coming up next, episode 3. The name of this episode is Hell Has a Front Yard. Hell Has a Front Yard. Check us out. There's a discount link in the bio. Warren Martin, Kansas Strong, and my name is Jason Spees. Landman is the show we've been previewing.